The postcard arrived on a rainy Tuesday, its edges curled, the handwriting familiar, yet impossibly distant. 20 years had passed since her small hand slipped from mine at the fair, but the words on that card, simple, cryptic, felt like a ghost brushing my cheek. I didn't know if I should hope, or if hope had already died in the quiet corners of my heart. I live in a small, weathered house at the edge of town, where the wind whispers through the pines and shadows stretch longer than they should. For 20 years, the memory of my daughter, Lily, has been a soft ache, a silent pulse in the back of my mind. The postcard changed everything. It was a whisper from a world I thought she'd left forever, a reminder that some mysteries refused to stay buried. The rain had been falling all morning, soft at first, then heavier, until it drummed against the roof like a steady heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table, half-empty cup of cold coffee in hand, staring at the stack of unopened mail. Bills, advertising letters I'd never read, they were all there, bland and unremarkable. Then I saw it, wedged between a utility notice and a magazine subscription. Its edges were curled, corners slightly frayed, the paper thick and yellowed with age. I picked it up, my fingers trembling despite myself. The handwriting made my chest tighten instantly. Loops and swirls I had memorized the moment she first learned to write, 20 years ago, long before she vanished that summer evening. The name on the envelope wasn't printed. It was written, perfectly, unmistakably, by the small, careful hand of my daughter, Lily. I stared at it, wondering if my mind was playing cruel tricks, if grief had finally warped reality into something unrecognizable. Tears blurred the edges of my vision, and I set the coffee down, letting it go cold on the table. I turned the envelope over, taking a deep breath before pulling out the card inside. The image startled me, a hill bathed in golden sunlight, soft grass rippling in the wind. At the top, a single tree stretched its arms wide, casting a shadow like a guardian over the slope. Across the photograph, written in the same looping handwriting, were just 3 words: Heaven Hill, waiting. The words were simple, almost painfully so, yet they struck like a hammer. My hands shook as I traced them, fingers brushing over the ink, as if touching the memory itself could confirm she was real. I couldn't breathe properly. How could she send this? How could this possibly exist? 20 years. 20 silent, empty years. And suddenly, here was a postcard from a place I didn't understand, a message from a life I thought was lost forever. I sank back into the chair, listening to the rain tapping against the window, each drop like a clock ticking down a moment I didn't know I was waiting for. The smell of wet asphalt and earth seeped through the open window, mingling with the faint scent of old paper. For a moment, the world outside the kitchen seemed unreal, distant, as if the rain had created a thin veil between the present and a past that had been frozen for 2 decades. I remembered the day she disappeared. The fairground, the laughter, the sudden screech of a carousel wheel, how quickly a child could vanish into a crowd. I had chased shadows, screamed her name, called every friend and neighbor, but she had simply gone. And all I had left was the echo of her laughter, fading through the years, haunting the corners of every empty room. And now, here she was, or at least, something of her. Something trying to reach me. My heart pounded with a mixture of hope, fear, and disbelief. Was it really her handwriting? Could it be a cruel prank by someone who had known me, known my grief? I checked the envelope again, no return address. Nothing, only the careful loops of letters that were unmistakably hers. I ran my fingers over the postcard again, this time noticing details I hadn't at first. The light in the photograph was peculiar, almost otherworldly, the kind of golden haze that doesn't exist in ordinary sunlight. The hill itself was empty, save for the solitary tree, but I could almost feel a presence there, a warmth, subtle yet insistent, tugging at some buried part of my heart. A whisper of memory, maybe, or a ghost of what once was. I held the card close, pressing it to my chest, and for the first time in 20 years, I allowed myself to hope. The quiet ache that had defined every day of my life seemed to pulse in response, fragile and tentative. Could she really be out there, somewhere reaching back to me? Or was this a trick of the mind, a cruel reminder of what I had lost? The rain softened outside, but the heaviness in the room remained. I placed the postcard on the table in front of me and stared at it, as though by focusing all my attention on those 3 words I could make sense of them: Heaven Hill, waiting. Each word felt layered, weighted with meaning I could not yet decipher. Waiting for what? Waiting for me? Waiting for her own courage? Waiting for a moment that might never come? A sudden creak from the hallway startled me. Though I was alone, my heart leapt into my throat. I wanted to tell myself it was just the house settling, but a small, irrational part of me thought maybe it was her. Maybe it was her. Maybe Lily somewhere, softly testing if I was listening. I pressed the postcard to my forehead, closing my eyes, willing the memory of her to breathe life into the silent, empty house. Finally, I set the card down, straightened the envelope, and resolved that I could not ignore it. It was a door, a sign, a whisper across the years, and I had to answer. My hands still shook as I gathered my coat and boots, feeling the damp chill of the morning seep into my bones. Outside, the rain had slowed to a gentle mist, leaving the world washed clean and trembling with possibility. I paused at the door, glancing back at the postcard, now lying on the kitchen table like a promise. Something told me that following this path would change everything, or perhaps it would simply remind me of what I had been missing all along. Either way, I had to go. I had to see Heaven Hill, and in that quiet, rain-soaked morning, I realized the truth I had buried for 2 decades. Some messages do not wait for the living to be ready. Some messages insist that we face them, that we follow, that we find what was lost, or at least come close enough to touch it. And so, with the postcard pressed into my coat pocket, I stepped out into the mist, heart racing, mind trembling, and hope, long dormant, flickering to life. The attic door groaned as I lifted it, a sound I had forgotten existed in the house I grew up in, now dulled by years of quiet absence. Dust rose like tiny ghosts in the streaks of late morningite, settling back down on forgotten treasures. Boxes, stacked haphazardly, their cardboard worn and stained, held the pieces of a life I hadn't touched in decades. Lily's life, my daughter's life. My hands trembled as I stepped forward, inhaling the thick, dry scent of old paper, mothballs, and something faintly sweet. Her perfume, or the memory of it. I knelt by the first box, lifting the lid carefully, as though even the act of looking might shatter fragile threads of memory. There was her stuffed rabbit, ears slightly frayed, stuffing peeking through where time had worn it thin. I remembered holding it for her when she cried, whispering promises I had no way to keep. Beneath it, a pile of her watercolor sketches spilled across the box, edges curling and faded from sun and age. Each brushstroke spoke of a child who saw the world differently. Bright skies, rolling hills, and, always, the trees that seemed to watch over her. I pulled one of the sketches free, pressing it to my chest as if I could physically bring her closer. The hill in the drawing looked familiar. The slope of Heaven Hill, maybe, or the one from the postcard. The sunlight fell just the way she had painted it, golden and almost alive, illuminating the small details I had never noticed before. A tiny flower at the base of the tree, a bird perched near the top, poised as though waiting for someone. Was this her memory of the place, or some secret she had never told me? My chest tightened, and I felt the old familiar ache in my heart. Next, I found a small shoebox, lid decorated with stickers she had chosen herself. Inside were her tiny shoes, scuffed and worn, the leather soft and supple from endless adventures. I picked up one shoe, tracing the worn edges with a finger. How many steps had she taken in these? How many steps before they carried her away from me forever? My throat constricted, and for a moment, I had to set it down. The weight of 20 years of absence pressed down on me, relentless and suffocating. The attic felt colder now, the dim light shifting as clouds passed overhead. I moved to another box, one marked with her name in my handwriting. The loops of my letters childish compared to hers now. Inside I found letters, notes, and birthday cards, each one a reminder of the daily moments I had missed while searching for her. I held a small card in my hand, dated the day before she disappeared, a simple drawing of a sun smiling above a hill, colored with a reckless abandon only a child can manage. My eyes blurred, and I pressed it to my lips, whispering her name into the silence. Time seemed to stretch in the attic, measured only by the shifting light and the creak of the old floorboards beneath me. I sat cross-legged among the boxes, surrounded by the fragments of her childhood, and felt the weight of what I had lost. Memories came in flashes, her tiny hand slipping from mine at the fair, the sudden shriek of a carousel wheel, the panic that followed. And then, nothing. The silence that followed her disappearance had been louder than any sound I had ever known. And now, after 20 years, a postcard, a single message, had reopened every ache and hope I had tried to bury. I traced the edges of a watercolor painting of a hill with my fingertip, remembering how she had insisted it was special, even then. She had always been drawn to hills, to trees, to quiet places that seemed to hold secrets. Now, holding the postcard in my pocket, I wondered if she had been waiting for me all along, leaving subtle markers, sketches, and notes like breadcrumbs, only I could follow. My mind spun with questions. How had she survived? Where had she been all this time? Why now, after so long, send a single card with 3 cryptic words? The attic seemed to breathe with me, a space suspended between past and present. Dust motes floated lazily in the light, as though marking the passage of invisible time. I realized that this room, with all its clutter and memories, was a sanctuary I had never returned to. Not really. I had been living in the shadow of grief, avoiding the tangible remnants of her life, because to face them was to face the depth of my loss. And now, confronted with the evidence of her existence, I could no longer pretend the past was gone. I found her favorite sketchbook, tucked behind a stack of old clothes. Opening it, I discovered drawings I had never seen before: hills, trees, and distant landscapes, rendered with a precision and tenderness that spoke of years of observation, of waiting, of growing up somewhere I did not know. Some sketches were annotated with tiny notes in her handwriting, words I could barely decipher but that seemed to pulse with meaning. My chest ached as I read them, a mixture of longing, fear, and awe washing over me. She had been alive, thinking, creating, surviving, all while I had mourned. Finally, I pulled a small envelope from the back of the box, unmarked except for her name written in my handwriting. Inside were 2 postcards I did not remember seeing, each depicting hills bathed in sunlight, similar to the one that had arrived in the mail. I held them side by side, the colors vibrant and warm, and felt a shiver run down my spine. They were signs, they were markers, and they were markers, and they were, somehow, hers. My heart, long dormant, began to stir with something fragile. Hope. I stayed in the attic for hours, surrounded by her life, by the tangible remnants of her childhood. Each item, each sketch, each tiny shoe was a bridge to her, a reminder that she had existed, beyond the memory of that summer day. And now, 20 years later, she was reaching out again. The postcard was only the beginning. As the light outside faded and shadows stretched long across the attic floor, I made a decision. I would follow the trail wherever it led. The postcard had shown me a direction, but these memories, these pieces of her life, were the map. Somewhere beyond the mist and rain, beyond the hills that haunted my dreams, Lily was waiting. And I would find her, or at least I would try. The attic fell silent again, save for the faint sound of the rain tapping against the roof. I placed the postcards, sketches, and letters carefully back in their boxes, as though preserving them might somehow preserve the fragile hope growing inside me. I descended the stairs slowly, each step heavy but determined. The world outside was damp and grey, but inside me, something had shifted. The search was no longer just a desperate pursuit. It had become a journey of memory, of love, of finally listening to the quiet whispers of what had been lost. And as I opened the front door, stepping into the misty morning, the wind carried a faint scent of earth and flowers. Something impossibly familiar. For the first time in 20 years, I felt that the impossible might be waiting for me, just beyond the horizon. The sky had lightened to a muted grey by mid-morning, the rain now a soft drizzle that left the road slick and reflective. I slid into the driver's seat of my old sedan, the leather cracked and familiar, and tucked the postcard into the dashboard compartment, where it seemed safe, like a secret companion for the journey ahead. I didn't know what I would find on Heaven Hill, or if I would find anything at all. All I knew was that I had to follow the trail, wherever it led. The streets of my hometown town were quiet, emptying with a stillness that mirrored my own mind. Trees leaned into the wind, branches shaking as if nudging me forward, and the scent of wet earth and pine filled the car as I drove. Every familiar landmark brought a pang of memory: the corner store where she had begged for candy, the church steps where she had chased pigeons, the park where we had spent entire summers watching clouds drift lazily across the sky. They were relics of a life I had lived in fragments since her disappearance, reminders that some things endure, even when the people who matter most vanish. As I left town behind, the road narrowed and twisted, flanked by dense pine forests. The air grew cooler, damp and heavy with the scent of moss and wet bark. I drove slowly, taking in the rhythm of the tires against the asphalt, letting the quiet hum of the engine lull me into focus. It felt as though I were crossing into a space outside of time, a place where the past could catch up with the present, and where 20 years of absence might finally converge with a single moment. I reached the edge of the forest and saw the first hint of the hill from the postcard. Its silhouette rose gently, bathed in a haze of mist that clung to the trees like a veil. The solitary tree at the top stood unmistakable, a guardian frozen in sunlight and memory. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as my pulse quickened. Was it possible that this place had endured all these years, waiting for me, waiting for her? I felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on my chest, equal parts hope and dread. The road became a dirt path, winding and uneven, and I slowed to a crawl, feeling every dip and bump beneath the tires. The mist thickened, clinging to the car in ghostly swirls, obscuring what lay ahead. I realized I hadn't spoken aloud in hours, my voice swallowed by the hum of rain on the roof. The silence was heavy, charged with the possibility of discovery, or the pain of disappointment. Each turn of the wheel seemed to pull me further into a memory I had long tried to forget.